Hi everyone. So before getting to the main subject of this one, just a few things I want to talk about. Firstly, a quick word on the passing of Angelus. If you don't know, he was a great composer um, of film scores, and it's sad news because I think he was truly a rare talent. Um, it's often been quoted his score on Blade Runner. I haven't seen that film. Chariots of Fire, magnificent. Alexander, the Oliver Stone epic about Alexander the Great, epic. He truly was a talented man, quite a private figure, but just beautiful, stunning, inspiring music. So if you are not familiar with him, just type in Vangelis, 1492 Conquest of Paradise, Ask the Mountains. I mean, the list goes on, just beautiful, beautiful music. So that's sad news. The world has lost a great talent. Um, I have started Twitter. I now have a Twitter account. Now, I'm going to talk more about this in another video. But if you want to follow me there, Nathan Hazlett 22 is my Twitter, I guess they call it handle. I'm still a little bit new to that, so finding my way around, but I would like that to grow. My idea really one day is to amalgamate or to link up all my social media platforms. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, obviously, Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on some Chinese networks as well. So I've got a wide presence across social media, and hopefully, as I achieve some of my aspirations, I'll be able to get to link these things up so that people can have a kind of go to if they perhaps use one but not the others. Just follow me. Um, and a quick word to Homu Kau. You commented recently on the video about why I YouTube. Thank you for that. It was a nice comment, and I appreciate that. I appreciate all the support. Okay, so cancel culture. I've spoken a lot about the culture wars. I've spoken a lot about woke ideology. I've spoken a lot about a lot of issues around that. I haven't spoken too much about cancel culture. So I want to just outline how I see this. Firstly, I think it's important to think about what cancel culture is and what it isn't, right? What cancel culture isn't is people just criticizing someone or disliking them. People have a right to dislike someone. It tends to be about public figures, so let's stick to that sort of area. Um, if a public figure has a particular opinion or viewpoint or action that people don't like, people have a right to dislike that or criticize it. And criticizing that is in itself not cancel culture, right? If someone chooses to no longer buy a musician's music or to no longer watch an actor's films or buy a writer's books or follow a particular sports person, that's not cancel culture. That's a right to do that. I think it crosses into cancel culture when there's a concerted campaign to destroy that person in terms of specifically destroy their career and yeah, their whole public profile presence. Um, it's entirely people's right whether or not they buy something. So I wouldn't say boycotting is necessarily cancel culture. Um, Perhaps it crosses into cancel culture when there's a campaign to sort of get others to boycott. Um, and I think that when you start seeing a situation of, let's say, film studios, publishers, um, and various organizations disassociating themselves with someone because that someone has suddenly become controversial, that crosses into the realm of cancel culture because it's not their opinion. It's not like we no longer want to be associated with this person because we don't agree with them. It's we're going to cave into public pressure. That's where it becomes problematic. An example of this is when actors are dropped from productions. Johnny Depp being dropped from the latest Pirates of the Caribbean film, ostensibly because of the allegations against him. And that is why the Depp Heard trial is so important, why it isn't just celebrity fodder, because it has wider implications. So that would be an example, I would say, of cancel culture because he was dropped because Hollywood, Disney specifically in this case, um, doesn't want to be accused by feminists of and Me Too campaigners of employing someone who's been accused of domestic violence and abuse, even though a lot of those claims are now really falling apart. J.K. Rowling, as she's controversial with trans activists, there's been efforts to basically ban her books and so on. That's cancel culture. But if a trans activist says, I will no longer buy J.K. Rowling's books, I consider her a transphobe, um, whether you agree with them or not, it's the right to say that. They might be wrong about it, but it's an opinion. Um, it's a bit like the freedom of speech issue. Criticizing someone's opinion isn't an attack on the free speech. It's something that's often conflated because a big part of free speech is the right to criticize others. I've used this argument when it comes to controversial comedians. If someone says that's in bad taste, that isn't taking away the comedian's free speech. Now, if you say they should no longer be allowed to make a profit out of their comedy, all their content should be cancelled, all their DVDs should be stopped, that would be cancel culture, and I don't agree with it. Um, so it's very important to get a balance here, which is the right to criticize without going beyond that, without a concerted effort, a campaign to destroy someone. Now, I think it's legitimate if you say, um, this person is a charlatan, this person is a bigot, this person is X, Y, and Z. Um, and of course, people should be responsible to make sure what they're alleging is true. That's fine. That's freedom of speech. And I've always said that public figures have to expect criticism. Public figures cannot complain about people criticizing them. They could defend themselves, but they cannot imply that they can't be criticized. And when I say public figures, I'm not just talking about really famous people. I'm talking about people who have got into the public realm for one reason or another. Dr. Charlotte Prideman, who I've quoted before on this channel recently, the self-described feminist barrister. I wouldn't say she's a celebrity. She's not famous, but she's a public figure insofar as she's been in the news, and insofar as she's got relative prominence. She's one of those personas who is not exactly famous, is not a celebrity, but has got into the public realm because of reviews and because of her, actually in this country, because she sued her employer for sexual harassment, but more recently because she's very outspoken on gender issues. So someone like her cannot complain about people criticizing her because she has chosen to make herself prominent. She's chosen to be vocal. Um, Now, if I get more prominence, I will expect that some people won't like me, some people will criticize me, and that's fine. That's their right, and I've got a right to defend myself. And it really is that simple. That's the beauty of free speech, which is it's give and take. You can give an opinion, and you have to accept that other people might not like it. Doesn't mean you have to correspond with them. Doesn't mean you have to justify yourself. But yeah, it's that's a big part of it, and that's why I think also, people shouldn't rush to sue others just because they've criticized them. If it's um, if it's a case where it's defamatory and libelous to the point where it is damaging their career, and that is the whole point of this Depp Heard trial. Now, if Johnny Depp was saying, oh, Amber has said unpleasant things about me, I'm going to sue her, I'd say, well, he's being a bit immature, it's between the two of them. The problem is it has had real world implications on his career. That's why he's doing it. If he was simply saying, I don't like what she's saying about me, so I'm going to sue her for that reason, I would say, well, you're a public figure. She's a public figure. You have a difference of, you see things in a different way. But when allegations have an impact on someone, then the someone has a right to defend themselves. And if that means the necessity of taking legal action, that's the way it has to be. I've trained as a freelance journalist, and I'm acutely aware that libel is something we need to be very careful about. So when I write articles, who knows further down the line, if I'm lucky enough to be able to do op-eds, I'll have to be very careful that when I'm talking about someone, perhaps criticizing someone, I need to be very sure that my information is correct, because as a journalist, you could be sued. And in the UK, libel law is quite a contentious issue. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but summed up, I'm against cancel culture. I do not agree with these campaigns to destroy someone's career just because they have a controversial point of view. And I do think, overall, I think the left is more guilty of it. I'm not going to say it's solely the domain of the left. I mean, in perhaps a right wing environment, if someone has more left wing views, I don't think it would always be a case that they'll simply be allowed to flourish with their opinions. I do think both sides play this game, but I do think the left is more guilty. I do think the left overall is more likely to demand boycotts, is more likely, for example, when someone goes to speak at a university, for left-wing woke students to protest that. Um, Now, you could say it's a right to protest, but when they're extending that to say the person shouldn't even speak, I would say, well, it's your right to say we strongly disagree with that person's point of view, but to say they shouldn't even be given a platform, I don't know about that. Actually, I'll just say one point about this issue of platforms. I do think there is another side to it. People have free speech and people have a right to a platform, but I do think there is also a cynical side of that, which is controversial people are sometimes given platforms solely because they're controversial. An example of this would be Piers Morgan. Now, I fully support his freedom of speech, but a cynical side of me does think that he is promoted because he's controversial. I mean, the way it's marketed, I've seen advertisements in newspapers where he's pointing to the complaints department. In other words, he knows that people will complain about him and he relishes it. He loves it. I honestly think Piers Morgan doesn't have much conviction. I think he will say anything to basically rile people up. Anything. And I think he's has contradicted his own positions at times, whereby he's taken a certain position, then he's attacked someone else for taking a very similar position, just because he likes to argue. I think he's a contrarian, and I think he's controversial for the sake of being controversial. That's very different from just standing up for your conviction. That's why I am somewhat cynical about Piers Morgan, even though I happen to agree with some of his positions. I just question how sincere he is. That's my issue. So the thing about the platform, we'll take someone like Jeremy Kyle. Okay, so I've questioned myself on this. I can't stand the man. I think he is obnoxious. I think he's a hypocrite. I think his sick show exploited people. So some might say, well, Nathan, would you support the cancelling of Jeremy Kyle? Yeah, it's a difficult one because I'm against cancel culture, but I also don't think someone like that should be promoted. And that's where I'm talking about platforms. I don't think someone's freedom of speech should be taken away, but I don't think someone should be promoted solely because they're controversial. And I think if the person is so polarizing and so controversial that a studio or a newspaper or a magazine is promoting them solely because they want ratings. I think that's very cynical, and I would criticize that. I would say, what has this person done to warrant the platform? I mean, if they have significance to sport, I suppose that's the impetus for it. I suppose that's the rationale for it. But if it's solely to be controversial rather than just to generate debate, then I would question it. Um, Basically, I'm saying that I don't think people should be given a platform just so they could be controversial. I think that there should be a plurality of opinions. I think there should be diversity of opinions, and I think controversial opinions should be allowed. What I'm saying, though, is that there shouldn't be controversy for controversy's sake. And I honestly think shock jocks, that's what they're all about. They just like to rile people up. They like to shock. They like to be controversial for the sake of it. And I honestly question how much conviction they have. I don't believe Piers Morgan has a great deal of conviction, and I believe someone like Alex Jones. Um, I honestly don't think he's entirely stable, and I don't say that flippantly. I really don't think the guy's stable. Um, Right, I'm going to wrap this up, but that's basically my take on cancel culture. I believe in free speech as broadly as possible, really, short of threats and explicit bullying. I think people should have a right to be controversial. I don't believe others should run to sue someone just because someone has said something unpleasant to them, um, unless there is clear evidence that it is seriously damaging the reputation unfairly. Otherwise, I think people should, especially if they're public figures, accept that not everyone's going to agree or like them, agree with or like them. Um, and I think that there is a gulf between disliking someone and disagreeing with them versus actively trying to destroy them. Now, um, well, let me give an example just in closing. I can't stand Jeremy Kyle. I've quoted him as an example. I think he's a hypocrite. I think his show is vile, exploitative, etc., etc. Now, what do I do? I've made videos criticizing him. He's a little bit off the radar at the moment, although I think he's on one of those radio shows nowadays. I think it's Radio 4 or something like that. So as a public figure, I will continue to criticize him when that is, when it's relevant. Um, but if I was to say go to a bookshop and demand that they stop selling his books, I think he's got a biography out, that would be going too far because I'd be trying to, censor him. I'd be trying to dictate to others what they can and cannot buy. So that would be cancel culture. So I don't even support cancel culture for obnoxious people. I think they should be criticized heavily, um, but cancel culture is going into something else. The only time it might be appropriate is when it clearly is just out of place. For example, it would make absolutely no sense to have a racial supremacist, whether they're a white supremacist or a black supremacist, put onto a board of some equal opportunities scheme, because clearly it's a contradiction. So there are certain circumstances where a campaign to drop someone might be valid, but I don't think it should be on allegations alone. I think there should be clear evidence. I do not believe in punishing someone before due process. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. That's basically my take on cancel culture. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers.